So my name is Jamie DeRuyter. I'm the department head at Ringling College of Art and Design for our newest major, which is called Entertainment Design. And that is a major where we focus on guest experience and storytelling in themed environments, themed spaces, themed experiences, healthcare, museums, theme parks, live shows, those kinds of things. So it's very exciting. I come to that major through a long path starting in animation. Starting out with that sense of like entertainment and storytelling and entertaining a guest or an audience member. That led me into the theme park industry and doing animation and visual effects on theme park attractions, which was unexpected for me. I thought, I'm going to make cartoons, I'm going to go to Pixar or DreamWorks and make movies, right? So I got an internship at a company that was doing graphics and visual effects for rides, and I had no idea that that was a thing. I had never even really been to a theme park before that. I've been to amusement parks, loved roller coasters and whatnot, but the big parks in Orlando had never been. So my first internship is working on an attraction at Universal, and suddenly I'm backstage in these big crazy spaces where you're doing these one-off things that it doesn't happen anywhere else. And my mind was just kind of blown. And so I kind of caught that bug and I went in that direction, and I realized that every project is different. Every project has its own unique challenges. Usually every project is something nobody's ever done before. And so that was really appealing to me. Like, we're gonna do this thing and nobody's ever done this? Yeah, this sounds great, right? So I got hooked right away. And I spent about 5 or 6 years in Orlando working on theme park projects, and then got the call from Ringling College to come down and teach. It was supposed to be kind of a temporary thing, maybe come down and teach for 1 year, help them fill a gap. But I caught that bug. Working with the students was amazing, it still is amazing. And so what I liked about being able to go to Sarasota and teach is that I could keep my professional practice going in Orlando. So I was able, and have been and still am, teaching and working in various industries. And so that has, again, kind of built up my portfolio in theme park work. But since starting this new major, I've branched out into museum work now, which seems like completely unrelated. But it's a themed space, a space where a guest is going to go in and have an experience. And the basic skills of art and design, I'm translating those from an entertainment project to a museum project. And it works, and it's fun and exciting. So when we're talking about themed environments and themed spaces and the process of kind of conceptualizing those and developing them and how that might differ from, say, your more traditional interior design type spaces, we're looking at a really heavy focus on story and narrative in the space. There's a space, there's a story to this space, why it is the way it is, how it got to be this way, what's happening in it now, and are you part of that story? And our intention is to kind of make the guests feel like they are part of that story. They maybe start to imagine that they're part of the narrative that's happening in that space. So we're trying to incorporate details and artwork into the space that communicate that story. Sometimes the spaces have stories being told in them by actors or animatronics or video, media content. And so there might literally be a story being delivered. Then in that case, the environment and the space is meant to support the story. It kind of like sets the stage and makes it kind of possible for you to kind of escape where you came from and just then let go and imagine that you're now in this world, this space, and witnessing and being a part of this story. And so getting down into some of the details of that and again, how it compares to traditional interior design practices, you tend to see a lot of one-off special things that maybe haven't been done before, pulling something out of a movie that maybe was digital and fake or made out of cardboard but nobody knew it, but now have to put it into an environment and a space where a guest can touch it or climb on it or spill their drink on it. And so bringing out those details and building them in the real world tends to involve kind of more artistry, more kind of craftsmanship of like how to make fake wood as opposed to using a real nice architectural piece of wood. And so there's this level of consideration for the art and the craft of the space that's different from, say, like the interior design industry. Not to say that that's, better or worse, but it's a different consideration. It's a piece of art, right? It's a work of art. A couple other key differences that I tend to kind of see. There can be, maybe to the detriment of a theme space, like once you build it, it's that space. And it might be that space for a decade. If you're lucky in a theme park world, the ride does last for 10 years. The good rides are now going 20 years running. And wow, 20 years, the queue line for the Mummy is still the Museum of Antiquities. And it still looks like that museum, and it's great, and it's not changing. That doesn't necessarily happen in an interior design industry. You might change your bathroom every 5 years, or a corporate office might get an update every few years or something. And it might be a little easier to change the paint, put different plants in there, use a different wall treatment or a different floor treatment. And so there's some flexibility and adaptability that comes with traditional interior design that we don't have in themed entertainment theme spaces. You've got to get it right. You've got to think about, is this going to hold up over 10, 15, 20 years? So that essence of like longevity, nothing's ever permanent, right? But you do have to kind of consider building things to last because they might be there for a really long time. I think another key difference between designing themed spaces and maybe traditional interior design architecture is this idea of trying to incorporate all the senses. When you're trying to deliver an experience for somebody, we're thinking about every sense we can. You want the guest to be able to touch some of it. That fake wood post in the queue line, it's wood, they're gonna touch it. Can it have a little bit of texture on it so it maybe feels like wood, but they can't get splinters, right? So you want people to touch stuff. They're gonna touch stuff, right? And of course that's gonna happen in a traditional interior design setting, but we're thinking about how that touch, that tactile sense enhances the story and further draws you into the world beyond a mere sense of it being pleasurable or comfortable. It's got to support the story and the experience. So we're looking at guests touching things, guests smelling things, right? Feeling the air or a cold breeze, if that makes sense at that moment in the story. Of course, the sights and the sounds. Often we're incorporating ambient sounds and kind of other supporting sounds to just help you believe that you're in that space and you're in that environment. So addressing all the senses, that's a big one. When you're trying to create immersion, when you're trying to create that believability, and you're trying to get that guest to just kind of really forget about the fact that they're in a crafted space and just go with it and be immersed in it. I think the senses are super important in that sense. So when we think about how theme spaces might influence or affect a guest's behavior, first of all, we know it is, and we want to. We are definitely trying to control the guest. We're definitely trying to make them feel something, make them think something, sometimes take them through an emotional arc. You might be kind of curious and exploring in the beginning of the experience, then suddenly things are exciting and dramatic, and you might be a little tense and nervous and scared, but then later you're like, oh, victory, we did it, we won, right? So we may be taking you through a whole arc of emotions in any one particular experience. And so the space does that. The colors, the smells, the lighting, the levels of light, all of that is going to affect how you feel. And it all touches on emotion. It's really like that's kind of at the core of when we're developing these experiences. Before we even start drawing the space, we start asking about the emotional tone of the space. So we're talking about emotion and trying to control the guest and control is a word that we use. But again, beyond emotion, we may be trying to get them to actually do something or go somewhere or move in a direction or not go that way, but definitely go this way. And so when we talk about that, we're looking at engagement and interactions. We want the guests to be engaged. We want them to be looking around and engaging with the surroundings or with the show or the story or sometimes with a cast member. So we want them to be engaged with it. We don't want them on their phone, just kind of not, paying attention. So we're trying to keep their attention. We're trying to control where they look. And then sometimes that goes a little further into interaction. Sometimes we might want them to go over and touch a thing or use a thing or open a thing or turn a thing on or turn a thing off. And so trying to entice them to perform actions, right? That's kind of the ultimate kind of challenge is, can you get a random person from anywhere in the world, can you get 100,000 of them a day to all go over there and press that button? And that's a challenging thing. So you have to use staging and composition and lighting cues and sound cues to kind of get them to do what you want them to do, go where you want them to go. And so behavior, controlling behavior is a big thing that we're doing. So in themed spaces and themed experiences, another interesting kind of behavioral thing that we see is a sense of community. Like going to a theme park is a communal experience. It's not something you do by yourself. You can go by yourself, but you're not going to be there by yourself. There's going to be a lot of other people around you, right? And so that's one of the things that people like about that. The whole family goes and does a thing together. That's why Walt built Disneyland. He wanted a place where the adults and the children could all play together. And that is still true today. And so I think themed spaces and themed experiences are important for that because it does pull us out of our living room and away from the TV and get us out there actually moving and talking to each other and experiencing things that you don't do it or see every day. So the communal aspect of it, I think, is important. And I think it does, in a very kind of light touch kind of a way, I think it does help to build some community. It does, when you go to a big park, you are there with people from all over the world, and how are you actually handling that? How are you being polite with somebody from another culture who is polite in a different way? How does that work? Who's cutting in line in front of who? How do you behave together? When you're all together in this giant park and you all want to go on this fun ride, what is that like? And I've seen it so many times where you don't know the person sitting next to you on the ride at all, but you get off of that ride and you're high-fiving, right? Because we did it. We stole the coaxium and we flew the Millennium Falcon safely and we won, right? And so that sense of like getting all the way down to the core of like what it is to be human is super interesting. And that comes out of people. Sometimes not for the best, but usually it brings out the best of us in parks because we're having fun. It's another interesting aspect to these themed environments is, generally speaking, most of the time, there's this undercurrent of like, isn't this fun? Isn't this more fun than just going to a regular dentist's office? Isn't it more fun when there are surfboards on the wall and a gator coming at you, that kind of stuff. So adding an element of fun to it, for me, is always like really high on the list. Can we have guests having fun while they're learning about the Constitution? Is that a thing? Can that be fun, right? And I think it can be if you're in the right space. Another interesting aspect of human behavior when we go to like theme spaces, and I don't have real data to back this up, but there's got to be some research on this. But it's kind of like generally people tend to go, oh yeah, I think that seems to make sense. There can be this kind of like perceived sense of greater kind of quality to the experience and or the space when it's like really well done and really well themed. I'll give you a kind of just a personal anecdotal example of that. So there's a restaurant in Orlando, it's a Cuban restaurant. It's on iDrive, so it is themed. It is, kind of bigger and more Cuban than any other place you've probably ever seen, right? And just like so many of these experiences, I've never been to Cuba. I'm not sure if I'll ever get to go to Cuba. I'm not sure if that place is authentic to Cuba, but it kind of feels like it is. But it is it's an inspiring place. Like it's really well done. It's very lively and active. The music's kind of loud. The wait staff is very friendly. The experience of going there is pretty awesome. Now, does that make the food better? Is the food better in that Cuban restaurant than like where I live? There's a Cuban place on this one road that's like you drive by it and most people would kind of be like, I'm not going in there. I don't know, it's kind of crazy. The food in there is probably just as good as the food in that fancy place on I Drive. It may even be better because of who's in there authentically cooking that food. But when we go to dinner at that Cuban place on I Drive, everybody's like, oh, that was amazing. Was it just the food that was amazing? No, it's the whole experience, right? And so having a well-done, well-executed themed space to support whatever is happening in there does elevate the whole experience. And so it adds to that perception of quality. And you'll have people say that like, oh, that was awesome or amazing. And they probably don't even realize it's because the environment itself was playing a part in that. The future of themed entertainment, themed spaces, themed environments, what we're seeing and what we're hearing from multiple angles, almost every angle, is that experience is paramount. Everything wants to move more towards an experience. Let's take like retail, for example. You can buy almost anything online. So if I'm going to go to a brick and mortar store, I want it to be an experience, something that's more enjoyable, more immersive, more tangible, obviously, than shopping online. And so we're hearing that from lots of sectors. Healthcare, right? That people want more than just a boring, sterile white room. And surprisingly, some of our young designers who are studying this and coming into the industry are interested in applying this to other areas. That light bulb goes off in their head where they go, oh, yeah, actually, when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time in physical therapy. And the place was terrible. I hated it. It wasn't motivating. I didn't want to go, but I had to go because I had to do it, right? And now their passion is to make that experience better for people who have to do that same kind of therapy. So healthcare is like so obvious, right? And you can see it. It makes sense when you think about a children's hospital, which is where we're seeing a lot of that development. But that's reaching out into almost every physical built space you can imagine. Corporate lobbies. A colleague of mine was involved in redesigning the corporate lobby for Intel. Intel, giant company, big, right? Big industry, lots of money, giant building, big corporation. What do they care if their lobby of their big corporate headquarters is an experience? Because everybody cares about it at this point, right? So when Intel wants to invite leadership from Samsung to come visit their headquarters, they want them to walk through the front door and be wowed by the experience of just arriving at the building. And so it's touching every market you can think of. Lately, I've been involved in some museum exhibit design projects, and it's been surprising to me the level of immersion, storytelling, and interactivity that museums are striving for these days. It's moving beyond, look at this amazing artifact underneath this glass bonnet, right? It's more about, well, let's tell the story of that artifact. Well, the story of that artifact could be an experience that the guest stands in and you experience it for a minute and a half. So the museum world is going real deep into this idea of an immersive experience. And so, we're kind of seeing it all over the place. Some other interesting things that are, I think, going to emerge off into the future. I mean, things that are happening now, like the integration of technology into spaces and experiences. It's full steam ahead at this point. Everything has some kind of digital component to it. That doesn't always necessarily mean it's a screen with a thing that you do, but there's digital technology all over the place. The lighting's all controlled, show controlled digitally, the sound, sometimes the physical, mechanical aspects of the space, the doors opening and closing, all really high tech. And along with that, I think we're also seeing a lot of strive for owners and operators are striving for developing like a personalized experience. That's starting to bubble up where Sure, maybe there's 50,000 people going through this thing, but somehow the experience knows who you are, so it plays the music you want to hear. You're seeing the low-level examples of that, like your Magic Band at Disney, keeping track of where you've been and what you've done, and maybe all your money is on here or something. That's evolving into like facial recognition. Like, oh, you go into an experience, it knows who you are just because your face is on camera, right? So now it knows who you are and maybe what you want to have to eat. We're not seeing a lot of that everywhere yet, but there are companies that they have these technologies are ready to go. We're at that point, I think, in the industries, in multiple industries, where people are trying to figure out how should we use this? And you got to be careful of some of that stuff, right? Some of that stuff, makes people a little nervous, a little scared. But I mean, the tide is moving that way. Everything's going to be more personalized. They're going to know who you are from your fingerprints and your eyeballs and all that kind of stuff. And so things becoming more personalized to you, I see that as being a trend it's catching some steam, and I don't think that's going to go anywhere. Of course, another kind of hot trend that is certainly hot now, and it will always be hot, is this idea of sustainability. A lot of times, a lot of the themed experiences or themed environments that we create, they don't last forever. And so where does all this stuff go? And the themed entertainment industry has not had a very good track record of recycling, all that old stuff. I think museums are probably doing better at that. Let's pull all these vitrines out here, where can we use them somewhere else, that kind of stuff. But it's always going to be a consideration, and I think the materials that we use to design and execute these environments, I think, are going to be better at that as we move off into the future. So sustainability is going to be a future trend that I think everybody's got to get better at, really. Well, another kind of, I think it was supposed to be a future trend, and I think it kind of should have been here by now, but we're still trying to figure it out, and that is kind of the blurring lines between the physical and digital worlds. The metaverse was the hottest buzzword a year or two ago. Now nobody's talking about the metaverse as a thing, but it's still a thing. And experiences, are trying to incorporate more of these immersive technologies. I think AR has maybe a better opportunity to gain some traction than full-on VR. You still see VR experiences at places right down the street at the Dali Museum. You could still see Dali in VR. People still do it, but it doesn't seem to be very, I think, accessible to everybody, right? Not everybody wants to put that headset on. Not everybody feels comfortable in those. But we're seeing a lot of new experiences pop up with AR, which doesn't, completely block out reality, but it just gets to supplement, augment, and add some other experiences. There, one just opened in Orlando. That's the whole concept is an AR experience. You go in with the glasses, and it's like this AR wonderland. And so those technologies are they're not actually really new. We're trying to tune them down to the point where they become more ubiquitous and usable. And I think that's going to keep going. I don't really know where it's all going to land, but that's something that I think you always have to kind of keep your eye on. It's like, where is the digital landscape? How's it starting to kind of integrate with the physical world? And how are guests reacting to that? Is it working? Do they like it? Are they going to do it? I don't know. So that's something that, and my students right now, you'll see them pitch ideas that incorporate those kinds of tech because they're more likely to be interested and excited about it, right? The technology is getting way more accessible, right? So, I mean, now people have VR headsets in their homes, right? And 5 years ago, almost nobody had one. Now, I'm not saying everybody has one, but when you can go down to Best Buy and get one for $299, they're there. Developing for them is still, that's a challenging thing. Actually creating the experiences and the content, that's a high dollar item, is to make that experience. But I think those ideas of using tech, using media, that can be accessible at a lower price point, maybe with projection, right? Where you can use a projector in a space and supplement kind of a static physical space with some active, moving content that may or may not be interactive, But then, maybe everybody in the space is able to interact or experience it and not have to take turns with a headset on, that kind of stuff. So, sometimes we do see, I think, if you can't get, all of the audience or all the guests into a virtual space, what from that virtual space can we bring out into the physical space and have it be close, that kind of stuff. So, using projection and media kind of moves you toward that space. Overall, themed environments are created to support an experience, and no matter what that experience is, be it entertainment or healthcare or education, the environment, the space, the lights, the sounds, the smells, all support the story and the experience of what happens in that space. And it's important because it affects our emotional kind of tone when we're in the space, and emotion is super important to learning, memory. One of the reasons why we want to invoke strong emotions when people have experiences, say entertainment or educational experiences, is memories implant stronger when there's a strong emotion tied to it, especially joy and excitement and happiness, or fear. You go to a haunted house, you're going to remember that because you were imprinted with that emotion. And so the themed space, the themed environment is going to elicit those emotions. It's going to support that experience that happens in that space no matter what that experience is. And so that's why themed environments are so critical.